Welcome to Optimize This House, where I'm going to take you on my journey of cool DIY projects where some are necessary, but really most are not. All right, I recently bought one of these Suncast storage sheds to put over on the side of the house. It's about 6 feet wide, 4 feet deep, and about 6 feet high. And we use it to store, backyard odds and ends. Now, one of the things you'll notice is at the bottom here, it's sitting on a wooden platform. And that's because the concrete here on the side of the house is sloped for drainage. And these things don't do very well if they're not sitting on a level base. So I had to go ahead and build a platform for it. I designed and constructed this one myself and leveled it, which is why it's a little bit bigger than the footprint of the shed. I wanted to give myself a little bit of room for error in case I, messed it up. But it's working pretty well. So I decided that I'm going to put another one of these in place. And that's what the project is that I'm going to walk you guys through today. What does it take to actually build one of these bases for one of these sheds? And how did I do it? So let's get started. Okay, so last time I built one of these sheds, I didn't open the manual that Suncast provides until it was time to start assembling the shed itself. And I kind of wish that I had opened that manual earlier, because had I done that, I would have found this section in the manual titled Site Preparation and Platform Construction. And in this part of the manual, Suncast actually gives you some really great directions and guidance around building a platform for the shed. Now, we're not doing a concrete slab because that's way too messy and way too permanent. So instead, we're going to do a wood platform. And Suncast tells you, use exterior grade wood, make sure you have a footing for the platform, how to attach the shed to the platform using lag screws and washers, and where the fastening locations are. But the best part is that Suncast actually gives you pretty detailed plans and measurements for what this platform should look like. And then they also give you a wood platform materials list. It's really helpful. I wish I had seen this the first time around. The only thing that I'm going to do differently is that where Suncast recommends 2x6s, I'm going to use 2x4s. I think 2x4s are going to be perfectly fine, and I'm going to save 2 inches on height. So yeah, I need 7 6-foot long 2x4s that are pressure treated and ground contact rated. I can probably get by with 6, but we're going to need the extra anyway for the footing. Now we also need this big piece of plywood to go on top of the platform. That's about 4 feet by 6 feet. What I would normally do is get a 4 foot by 8 foot piece of plywood and then ask Home Depot to cut it down to size for me so I could fit it in my car. However, it's important to note that not all stores will cut pressure treated lumber because of the chemicals that it releases into the air. So this is not really an option for me. Instead, I'm going to buy 3 2-foot by 4-foot project panels. It's basically the exact same wood, except it's already been pre-cut into smaller sizes. The downside of using these project panels is that the price per square foot is more than twice as high, so you're definitely paying a premium for the convenience. Okay, so let's take a look at our tools and supplies. We've got a couple of squares, a tape measure, clamps. Actually, we'll use 4 of these. Masonry drill bits, regular drill bits, a combination drill driver, an impact driver, and of course a circular saw to get all of our wood cut to size. Then we've got some gloves, some safety glasses, of course a pencil. We'll be using some Tapcon concrete anchors in combination with these galvanized L ties. Lag bolts and washers for the shed base, and a couple of boxes of screws that are rated for pressure-treated lumber. Each of these comes with a bit to drive the screws, which is nice, but they tend not to work that great. The one key tool I forgot to put on the table is a 2-foot long spirit level, which you'll see gets used quite a bit. And then we have our lumber, our 7 2x4s and 3 project panels. But before we get started, I want to show you one more thing. On this circular saw, there is 1.5 inches between the left edge of the blade and the left edge of the shoe. So when I cut lumber, I measure 1.5 inches shorter than I actually need. Then I put a guide down that I can run the circular saw against, and that gives me a cut at exactly the right length. There are a lot of great videos out there about proper circular saw technique. This is just what I do, and it works for me. And yep, I'm wearing safety gloves, but also flip-flops. So let's cut one of these 66.5-inch long pieces of wood. To do that, I'll measure it at 65 inches. I'll mark it. I'll put a guide down, and then I'll cut it. And there you go, exactly 66.5 inches. So after doing that a bunch more times, we have all of our 2x4s cut to the right length and ready for framing. I find the first corner the most difficult one to do. So this time I'm going to use a square as a guide so I can get a good 90-degree angle between these first two pieces of wood. Then I'll move down to the ground and do the rest there. I'm using 2 screws every time I attach these 2x4s together. Each screw is about an inch away from the top and bottom edge of the front 2x4 and about 3/4 of an inch away from the end because I want the screw to land in the middle of the 2x4 on the back. So with the rest of the outer frame done and my morning shade gone, we'll pick the rest up tomorrow. So now we're ready to assemble the rest of the frame, and the first thing we're going to do is to make some marks so we know where everything needs to be attached. And assuming we did a good job cutting all of our 2x4s to length, they really should just pop in here without too much effort. I mentioned earlier that the bits that come in these boxes of screws aren't that great, and this is where I started to experience that problem. The bit from the box started stripping out the heads of the screws. Now it's possible I wasn't driving these screws in perfectly straight because I was down on the ground, but in any event, I eventually switched to another bit that I already had, and then the problem went away. So having good tools definitely makes a difference. When it came to putting in this other beam, I ended up having a problem I didn't really expect. You can see that this other 2x4 that is also supposed to go across the middle here is actually pretty warped. It doesn't want to sit straight and it has a weird twist to it. I don't remember it being like this when I cut it the day before, so I think what's happening is that pressure-treated wood is actually pretty wet when you bring it home from the store. And as it starts to dry, it can actually warp. And maybe that's worse because we're in a heat wave right now? I don't really know. But this is why it's good to buy a little bit more wood than you need, because you never quite know what's going to happen. Anyway, I decided to come back to this later and instead work on a couple of those smaller 12-inch pieces. Which is when I discovered the 2x4 I put in earlier had also warped. And the 12-inch gap I was supposed to have at one end of this frame was now smaller than 12 inches. But I was able to get the other end in, and I had a plan for how I was going to deal with this warped piece of wood. Using some of the extra wood that I bought and some of the leftover scrap wood from last time, I built a little contraption that I could use to bend that warped piece of wood and give myself a little bit extra room to be able to fit that 12-inch 2x4 into place. Yeah, I probably could have cut that 12-inch piece of wood a little bit shorter just to fit it in there, but that felt like cheating, and you know what? Screw you, wood, for messing up all my measurements. So then it was time to come back to that one piece of wood that was really warped in the beginning. And instead of trying to fix it, I just replaced it with a new 2x4. And that's it. One last walk around just to make sure I didn't miss any screws and everything was all tightened down properly. And the frame is done. Now we just need to put it into position and get it leveled. If I take my spirit level and put it on the old platform for comparison, and then put it on the new one, you can see there's a pretty significant slope to the concrete back here. The way we're going to fix that is by taking our pieces of scrap wood and using them as little feet to raise the platform off the ground. I'm going to start by raising this back corner a ½ inch, so that way it's about at the same level as the old platform next to it. That means I need to cut this piece of scrap wood to 4 inches because the frame is made from 2x4s, which are actually 3½ inches wide. So 4 inches minus 3½ inches gets you a ½ inch of elevation. And now we just need to screw it into place. It's important that the foot stay flush or just below the top edge of the platform. Otherwise, it's going to affect the plywood when that gets laid down on top. And with that first corner done, I can start moving to the other corners and using my spirit level and a pencil to figure out how long I need to cut each foot. Just like how I joined the 2x4s together when I was building the frame, I'm using 2 screws here to attach each foot, but I put them in sort of diagonal to each other. So with the back feet done, the rest is basically just stacking scrap wood underneath the frame to try to get it level so you can start cutting the feet for the other positions. This part is actually pretty fun. Once I have feet in all 4 corners, the platform should be level and I can remove all the extra scrap wood from under the frame. And now that it's not laying on the ground, the additional feet give more support to the framing. If this were a real building, I'm sure there would be some regulation about how many feet you should have and where they should be placed. I'm not a contractor. I don't know what that regulation is, but my sense is for a shed this size, what I've done here is probably fine. So now we have all of our feet in. I decided to put a couple of extra feet in on the sides as well, just in case. And yeah, it looks pretty good. So when we put a level down, boom, look at that, it's level. Now we just need to anchor the platform to the ground, cover it with plywood, and we're done. We're going to anchor the platform to the ground by putting a couple of these L ties on diagonally opposite feet, and then we'll use our tapcons to bolt it down. So here's one of our tapcons, and as you can see, it doesn't fit through the holes that are on these L ties. So I'm going to drill one of these holes out a little bit larger. And again, I don't know if this would be a quote unquote approved way of bolting the platform to the ground, but this is a tiny little shed and this hardware is used for much bigger projects. So if anything, this is probably overkill. I'm using 2 drill bits here to gradually widen this hole, and this second drill bit is really dull, probably from the last time I did this. Anyway, good tools in good condition make a really big difference. Now we'll use our shorter screws to attach the L ties to the feet, and just like the longer screws we used earlier, these ones come with a bit, which I'm going to have to use because I don't have a better one in the same size. And with the bracket in place, we're going to drill straight down through the concrete with a masonry bit to make the hole for the tapcon. Make sure to keep the box for your tapcons handy because it says on the back what size masonry drill bit you should use. When you're putting in a tapcon, you always need to make the hole a little bit deeper than the length of the anchor. So I like to use a little bit of painter's tape to mark the drill bit about a ½ inch longer than the screw. Okay, so there's a couple things to note here. One, I probably should have planned better and not picked a hole so close to the corner of the frame because I couldn't get the drill straight down. The bit was moving side to side, and I ended up paying the price for this later when I had to put the tapcon into the ground. The other thing is to make sure you're wearing a mask during this because you do need to blow out all of this concrete dust, and that's not something you want to be breathing in. I've put a lot of these types of anchors in before, and it's never been this hard. I'm pretty sure it's because the hole that I drilled wasn't very good. I also don't like backing these things out and putting them back in, but the threads looked okay, and the hole wasn't crumbling, so I put it back in and it worked out. When I did the other anchor, I made sure to drill that hole very, very straight. And sure enough, the tapcon went right in the first time. So we're getting pretty close to the end here. And the only thing that's left is to put the plywood down on top of our frame. And this is just a matter of double checking our measurements and cutting our plywood to length. I'm screwing each one of these pieces of plywood down with 3 screws across each of the 4 beams. So that's 12 screws in total, and probably more than is necessary. Our last piece of plywood is cut to the correct length, but we need to cut a little bit of the width out as well because the platform is just under 6 feet wide. And with our last cut and last handful of screws, we are finished. And this looks really good. And most importantly, it's level. It's a 1/4 inch higher than the other platform because of the thicker plywood, but I don't think that's going to be noticeable. And when both of these sheds are side by side, it's going to look really clean. I'd give this project a difficulty rating of about 5 out of 10, right in the middle. It's not technically complicated, but you do have to use power tools. You're drilling concrete, there's a bit of precision necessary, and if you have a warped wood situation or other issue, you need to be prepared to deal with it. It's nice that Suncast provides plans for the platform. If they didn't, I would probably rate this a little bit more difficult. We were in the middle of a heat wave when I did this, so I had to work over multiple mornings when I had a bit of shade on the side of the house. But overall, I think it probably took me about 6 hours, which doesn't include the time necessary to build the actual shed. My materials cost was $172, which is basically just lumber and screws. That doesn't include the cost of the concrete anchors because I had a couple of those left over from last time, but I think they're probably about $5 to $10 for a box of 4. Was the project worth it? Actually, I think it's mandatory. I have an older shed that you didn't see in this video that I had set up on sloped ground and never put it on a platform. And it did not do well over the years. The door started getting all funky and the lid didn't close properly. So I think if you're going to invest in one of these sheds, you kind of need to put the time in to have it on a level base. So we'll see. I've got 2 of these sheds now and they're both sitting on platforms, and I think time will tell. So that's it. Thanks for watching Optimize This House. Make sure to like and subscribe, etc., etc. And yeah, check out my other videos.